Tonight on the Late Debate, Jeremy Corbyn says he's not done with politics yet, but he doesn't know if he'll be able to stand again as a Labour MP.
I hope so. I hope that the party reinstates the whip to me, which in my view should never have been removed.
Christmas cheer gives way to travel misery as fresh festive rail strikes are announced. And the fans are happy, but there's controversy in Qatar as sport and politics meet at the World Cup. Good evening and welcome to the Late Debate. Jeremy Corbyn, the former Labour leader, is still a party member, but he hasn't been a Labour MP for 2 years. He had the whip suspended after an investigation into anti-Semitism by the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, which found serious failings in leadership. I've been talking to Mr Corbyn. In a moment, we'll be hearing from our 3 London MP guests here in the studio. But first, I asked the Islington North MP if he thought Labour was in a good place to win the next election.
Well, if it was tomorrow, yes, but it's not going to be tomorrow. It's going to be probably 2 years' time. So I think things could be very, very different by then. So I think we need to have a much clearer alternative economic strategy to the government than we have at the present time, which should include, in my view, particularly issues like public ownership of energy.
Do you accept that for Labour to win the election, whatever the economic circumstances, it needs to be united?
Every party needs to be united to win an election, and an agreement on a series of policies and also motivation of the supporters and members of the party. That's obviously very important.
Can you be part of a united Labour Party led by Sir Keir Starmer?
Well, I'm a member of the Labour Party and I'm a member of Parliament, and I do a lot of work with my local Labour Party and Labour Party events all over the country, and I want to see an end to this Tory government. I want to see a Labour Party that is putting forward coherent radical views, because that, I think, is what this country needs.
Will you be Labour's candidate in Islington North at the next election?
I hope so. I hope that the party reinstates the whip to me, which in my view should never have been removed.
But you know what you need to do?
No, I don't know what I need to do, because the decision has been made and various things have been said, both behind the scenes and in public, about what should or shouldn't happen. My view is that I have been selected originally and elected for Islington North. I'm a member of the Labour Party and I'm totally focused on representing Islington North.
You know what Sir Keir Starmer has said. You need to either apologise or withdraw those remarks where you said that the Watchdog's report into anti-Semitism in Labour was exaggerated.
No, I didn't say that. What I said was I accepted the HRC report. What I also said was that some of the complaints that were made were either incorrect or exaggerated. What I also said, one anti-Semite is one anti-Semite too many. Anti-Semitism is a poison and an evil in our society.
If Sir Keir Starmer wants you to go further than what you've said, are you prepared to?
Well, I don't know what he wants. And so I think we should just say this. Racism in any form is an evil in our society. Anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-black racism, the rise of the far right, disgraceful language against migrants and refugees. That, I'm sure we can all be united on. Unite on that and move forward.
Do you suspect there is a move to make sure you're not selected as the candidate?
I don't know. My local party, Islington North, members have been disenfranchised in this process because they're not allowed to decide whether to go ahead with the selection or not. That hasn't happened. I am working, as I've always done, hard as the Member of Parliament for Islington North, and I'll carry on doing that.
And what happens if you're not selected?
Theoretical question.
Might you stand as an independent?
That's a theoretical question. Let's deal with the issue that I was elected as a Labour MP, and I'm proud to be the Labour MP for Islington North, and I want to carry on doing that.
I notice you're not saying you won't stand as an independent.
I'm not answering theoretical or hypothetical questions.
And what about the question of whether you might stand as an independent against Sadiq Khan in the next mayoral election?
Another hypothetical question which I can't answer, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to disappoint you on this occasion.
Do you think you could beat Sadiq Khan as an independent?
Well, it's a hypothetical question, so I can't really give an analytical answer to a hypothetical question.
Another bar you have to clear to get reselected or get readmitted to the Parliamentary Labour Party is to accept that Labour now has an unshakable support of NATO.
Well, that is not in the party's rules at all, and never has been in the party's rules. And indeed, no policy adherence has ever been in the party's rules. And indeed, when NATO was set up in 1948, there was a pretty robust debate within the Labour Party about it, and I accepted we are members of NATO, and indeed that was included in the 2019 manifesto, but that doesn't mean you should be uncritical of any group you're in or any alliance that you're in, because I want to see a world of peace in the future, and I think you have to work out the best way of achieving that.
Do you accept Labour's position on Ukraine?
The position on Ukraine, Russia is totally wrong. The invasion is wrong, the occupation is wrong, and I really struggle to understand what the strategy is of Russia in this. So I do think there has to be global moves, and basically they should be led by the UN rather than Western countries, to try and broker some kind of ceasefire followed by a withdrawal, because the death rate is appalling. We don't know what the total of it is, and the conditions of the people of Ukraine are appalling, and also the numbers of young Russians who've been conscripted and have died is huge, and also young Russians who've opposed the war have been imprisoned. So I do think there has to be some kind of global move made. We can't just be spectators in carnage.
Do you accept, though, that your position on the war in Ukraine, certainly at the beginning, further antagonised the Labour leadership, you going to stop the war rallies in April?
There's nothing wrong with going to a stop the war rally when we opposed this war in Ukraine. I made a speech in Trafalgar Square opposing the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And so I don't think I can be clearer than that.
Do you have any regrets over your time as Labour leader?
Well, I think it was Frank Sinatra on that one.
Looking back over that period, what would you do again?
I would be more robust on reforming the Labour Party's campaigning abilities and its relationship with communities. What I was determined to try and do was develop the Labour Party membership, which increased massively. It was 600,000 when I stepped down as leader, to make the Labour Party more involved in the day-to-day community of people's lives.
Would you have cracked down on anti-Semitism?
Of course, and I did.
Do you feel betrayed by Sir Keir Starmer?
Listen, it's not a personal issue. I feel that I have made my contribution to the party. I've helped to direct party policy, particularly the Green Industrial Revolution, and particularly the devolution agreements and the idea of abolishing the House of Lords and replacing it by some kind of Senate federal structure.
We're about to enter a period of more rail strikes which are going to disrupt people's travel over Christmas. Will you be on the picket lines?
Yes, I will be supporting the RMT. The reality is thousands of people work on our railways. They keep our railways running and they keep them safe. Many are very low paid. Those that clean trains, those that do catering, those that clean stations, they all deserve a pay rise. Why should they have a cut in their living standards?
You're a football fan. Do you think England should be in Qatar?
I'm obviously concerned about issues of human rights and have said so, particularly the treatment of lesbian and gay people.
Do you think the team should be playing?
Well, that's a hard one. They are playing, they are there. I wish they'd shown a bit more courage and worn their armbands.
You've been MP now for almost 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever think about hanging your boots up?
Boots? Hang up? No, never.
And if Labour doesn't choose you to be its candidate, will you miss it?
Listen, I will always, until my dying day, be active in politics. And I've had the pleasure and honour to be a Member of Parliament, and it's a job I work hard at, do to the best of my ability, and I hope I satisfy the people of my constituency in doing that.
Jeremy Corbyn, thank you for talking to us.
Thank you very much.
Joining me now with the Labour MP for Hornsey and Wood Green, Catherine West. For the Conservatives, it's the Ruislip Northwood and Pinner MP, David Simmons, and for the Liberal Democrats, the Richmond Park MP, Sarah Olney. Lots to talk about tonight. I'm going to talk briefly about what Jeremy Corbyn said. Catherine, not much sign of contrition there. Do you think he'll get the whip back?
I don't know, but I think the door is open. But I think there does have to be a recognition that the issue of anti-Semitism was not dealt with well, and the Human Rights Watchdog report was very clear, and Jeremy minimising that at the moment when we were meant to be showing that we'd understood why we lost the election was a very unfortunate chain of events. And I think that is really difficult because we need to learn from election defeat. And that was a very integral reason for losing the election. And that's why the Watchdog report, all the training we've done since, is so crucial.
And you didn't hear anything there that makes you think that he has come round to say what he needs to say?
I think we have to have a really strong statement as to the fact that anti-Semitism hurt the Jewish community deeply. And that needs to be said and to be out there in the public domain. And we need to be able to get over that.
David, I imagine you'd love it if he stood as an independent against Sadiq Khan in the mayoral election.
Well, clearly it's an issue for the Labour Party, but I think Catherine's absolutely right. You know, anti-Semitism and racism generally, Jeremy Corbyn's spot on, those are big issues. The key issue is to show that you're dealing with them effectively. And that was highlighted by the Equalities and Human Rights Commission as an issue for the Labour Party. It's an issue in politics generally, but I think it's important, whichever party you're from, whatever wing of that party you come from, you show that you take these issues seriously and your actions reflect that.
Sarah, he talks about not hanging up his boots. He'll be 75 at the next general election if he's still a candidate. Do you think MPs should be standing again at that sort of age?
I don't necessarily think age is a factor, but I do think there is a case for saying if you've been an MP for a long time, have you given all you've got to give? Are you still the best person to represent your community? Are there new voices, new people coming in? And, London is such a diverse city, it's changing all the time. Are you still the best person to represent your community? I don't necessarily expect MPs as individuals to have that kind of insight to themselves, but I think it's something that local parties should be asking themselves regularly.
OK, now anyone hoping to travel by train in the run-up to Christmas could be in for a very difficult journey. The latest strikes announced by the RMT were raised in Parliament earlier today.
The Secretary of State knows full well that he sets the flexibility and the parameters for both Network Rail and train operating companies on the financial offer they can put forward. It's in his hands to end those strikes and to do so today.
In order to pay for a better offer for rail staff, we need to deliver reform, which is why I want trade union leaders to get back round the table with the employers to hammer out the detail of those reforms. Then a better offer can be put on the table.
David, whatever Mark Harper says there, Mick Lynch of the RMT has a point, hasn't he, that the Treasury controls the purse strings. It's the Treasury calling the shots in this dispute.
It sounds like the offer on the table to the unions is pretty reasonable. And I think Mark
Harper's... Is there an offer?
Right, well, there has been an offer that's been made. I understand it's been rejected. I think Mark Harper's got a point. There's clearly rights and wrongs on both sides of this, but it would be good to see those people showing goodwill, being round the table, negotiating, working through the detail, rather than threatening strikes, which clearly, especially with the Christmas season coming up, are causing my constituents, a lot of people, a good deal of anxiety.
And Sarah, a lot of your constituents rely on the trains from South West London. They must be hopping mad.
I think it's incredibly frustrating for everybody. I think it's good to see that Mark Harper has got involved. I think that's a refreshing change from when Grant Shapps was Transport Secretary back in the summer when some of this was starting to happen. But we urgently need to see a resolution to this. And yes, you're absolutely right. It causes huge disruption in my constituency.
Catherine, rail strikes are slightly awkward for the Labour Party, aren't they? You, I presume, won't be joining anyone on the picket lines?
I think the point about this is in London, where somehow it's been better managed, we've had fewer strike days, whereas outside London, if you want to catch a train to Liverpool today, you would be lucky to get on one, because if there is one going, it would be so overcrowded you couldn't get a ticket. And if you did get a ticket, it would be extremely expensive. Last Saturday was the first day where we were at 103% capacity in the TfL system because it was kept going all the way through COVID despite there not being a proper deal. And then as soon as everybody could, they got back onto the network and now the finances are working again. The problem with the strikes is that the model doesn't work anymore because the government isn't helping the model to work and isn't doing the negotiations and isn't showing the leadership needed between the train operating companies and the workforce.
David, are you surprised that despite all the strikes on the underground and on the mainline trains throughout the summer and into the autumn, that there does seem to be quite a lot of public support for the union's demands for a higher pay rise?
Well, I think everybody recognises that there's an issue with the cost of living at the moment. Now, I understand the unions have been offered around an 8% pay rise, but clearly what we're seeing is different patterns around the country. In London, where, to be fair to the government, they have met the entire cost impact of COVID on the Transport for London budget, that those negotiations have proceeded and strikes have been avoided. The rail network more widely across the country has got a big, diverse range of different ownership, and it's clearly more complex to get that agreement in place. But I think it's important that ministers, the unions, are working with goodwill. My ask to the unions would be, stop worrying businesses, stop worrying people about their transport arrangements, take the strike threat off the table and get back to the negotiations.
Sarah, do you worry that if the rail unions are successful, that they'll unlock the floodgates and we'll have this inflationary wage spiral of the sort we saw in the 1970s?
I think the important thing to remember is that everybody is really struggling with the extra cost of living right now. I mean, the fuel bills are going up, everybody's food bills going up, and of course then the Chancellor announced last week extra taxes. So for people who are really struggling with all of those costs, and of course, big issue in my constituency is the extra cost of a mortgage since the disastrous mini-budget in September and the chaos that caused for interest rates. So everyone is struggling with additional costs right now. So yes, I think there is a real danger of what you might call the secondary impact on inflation of potential wage increases. But I haven't heard of anybody getting a wage increases anywhere close to inflation. Inflation numbers from 2 weeks ago, 11.1%. We haven't seen that in my lifetime, I don't think. So it's a really, really difficult period right now. And I think there's got to be flexibility on both sides to make sure that people can get through it as best they can.
Is it time for pay restraint, a phrase we haven't heard for many years?
Well, not necessarily. I think it's time for a deal that we can get us through to the next year, because there are still a lot of things that we don't know, whether the Bank of England will ease off a bit on its trajectory to increase the cost of borrowing. There are a lot of things that are unknown, but one thing is for sure, we are worse than anywhere else. And I do think that the fact that the government is not elected, Mr Sunak was never elected either by his own people or by the country, and I think that leads to a sort of flatness in Parliament and a lack of leadership in public services, and I think that's what you can feel. You can feel a flatness everywhere.
David, you will disagree with Catherine about whether the government was elected or not, but is there a point? Does she have a point there?
Well, we're in a parliamentary democracy, but I don't think the figures bear out the suggestion that the UK is worse than everywhere else. In fact, we're pretty much similar to the rest of the world. The challenges that we face largely stem from rising US interest rates. The Bank of England have already been clear and very public that they think, as a result of the measures taken by the new Chancellor, that interest rates will peak at a much lower level. And we've also seen, to Sarah's point, a lot of mortgage deals coming into the market as a result of that, which means the cost of borrowing to households will come down significantly. And at the same time, we look at the international markets, what's going on with our energy prices, particularly gas and oil. Those prices have fallen back to around 2019 levels. So a lot of this inflation is working its way through our economy. And that's why I think Sarah's point and Catherine's point about wage restraint are crucial. If we are going to see a situation where there's a spike, but a relatively brief spike, we don't want to make the situation worse for everybody in the country.
Do you feel gloomy as a Tory MP in London?
No, I don't. I think actually we've got a lot to be positive about. The situation in the economy, very high employment, we've got really good availability of work. We're seeing prices beginning to fall for things like the cost of borrowing and also the cost of energy. All of those bode well for household budgets. So we want to make sure that that trajectory continues. And what I've seen so far certainly bodes well for the economy, and what bodes well for the economy tends to be good for the government.
Sarah, do you think the Sunak-Hunt combo has come to the Tories' rescue in London?
No, I don't think that at all.
Do you worry that it might work?
Well, I mean, I think Catherine's absolutely right, because Sunak himself has not been elected on a manifesto for change, for anything at all. So it's difficult to see what he's going to be able to put on the table that the Conservative Party can unite around and which can really push forward change. I do think we're in for a period of sort of political inertia. And while some people will welcome that, it will just be a prolonging, actually, of the political instability we've had for such a long time, which has had such a really damaging impact on our economy. And I do want to pick up on David's point there. He's like, high employment, lots of job availability. What we're really seeing is a squeeze on the workforce because there are so few people available to do the jobs. There's huge vacancies everywhere. And also then he was like, well, it'll be great for household budgets. But he also says there needs to be wage restraint. I think you're really at cross purposes.
All right, can we just talk about one other issue, which many people think is perhaps the most important issue around at the moment, the World Cup. Do you think FIFA have shot themselves in the foot with Qatar?
Well, there have
and it's FIFA that has brought the game into disrepute this time.
Well, there have always been questions around questionable deals and corruption with that particular organisation, and sports organisations aren't always known for their cleanliness and their clean hands. However, having said that, I do really welcome the debate. I love the way the German team put their hand over their mouth before their match to show that they were being silenced. And I love the fact that our players wanted to have the armband. And I love Harry Kane and Gareth Southgate. How about we put those two into the House of Commons to take away the zombie parliament, and maybe we would get a little bit more oomph and a little bit more business confidence at the same time.
James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, went to Qatar, came back and said that he'd been assured that LGBT fans were under no threat. Now, there's been no physical violence, but there's certainly been some intimidation. Do you think the Qataris pulled the wool over his eyes?
Catherine's right. I mean, this has been a known issue for a long time. A lot of questions about the fact the Cup is taking place there at all. But I think it's a good thing that we've got home nations that are playing. I think it's a good thing that this is publicising what's happening in Qatar and basically stimulating the debate about these kind of regimes around the world. And I think the more that they're engaged, the more they're forced to look at themselves in a mirror and see the impact this is having on their own people and their reputation around the world, the more likely we are to see change. So in that sense, it's a good thing. And I think we should be optimistic about it, bringing about change in Qatar and elsewhere.
What do you think, Sarah?
I think, obviously it has really highlighted some of the issues, not just the LGBTQ plus community and their continued discrimination against them, but also, of course, the migrant workers and the way they've been treated. And so, yes, I suppose it's good that the spotlight is on them, but really what I feel is for the players and the fans and the people who just want to watch the football, it's put them in a horrible position because they are now sort of tacitly supporting some of the things that have gone on behind the scenes and some of the appalling human rights abuses that have been committed in order to create this tournament. But, they just want to watch the football. And so I really do feel very strongly that FIFA have let the world of football down here.
We're almost out of time. Catherine, could I ask you a really difficult question? Are you supporting Australia or England?
England, of course.
And you're watching?
And also the Socceroos didn't do very well in their first, did they? So, of course, I'm watching as many matches as I can.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks to all my guests tonight, Catherine, Sarah, David, and to Jeremy Corbyn. I'll be back next month with the last show of this momentous year. Until then, thank you and good night.